gang, welcome to another episode of Value Added, the real estate podcast. On this week's episode, we're chatting with Art Lieb. Art is the managing partner of Atlanta, Georgia-based Province Real Estate. They are a multifamily property management firm. They currently have about 7,000 units under management and growing. So without further ado, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to Value Added, the real estate podcast where we speak with the brightest minds in the world of real estate who provide, create, and realize value in an ever-changing market. And now your host, Nick Walters.
We're live, so I appreciate you coming on here, Art. Tell me a little bit about your career. You've had an extensive career since graduating from University of Florida, Gator Bait, as a fellow SEC guy. Let's see, I went to the Swamp in 2001 when we lost very, very badly. But the year before, I want to show you. Here's me. With the white hat on, carrying the goalpost off the field when we beat number 3 Florida in 2000. I think that may have been your senior year.
Oh my God!
One of my great memories of Stark Vegas. Yeah, tell me about when you graduate from Florida. You looks like you got right into property management. How has your career panned out in the last 20 or so years?
Yeah, I'm a property management lifer for the most part. My second job out of college was working as a leasing manager for a student housing project in Gainesville after I graduated from the University of Florida. So I got a pretty good trial by fire going into student housing, which anyone will tell you is, they call it multifamily, property management on steroids. Definitely got a lot of knowledge and experience from that out of the gate. And then I did that for about 2 years and decided I wanted to move to a bigger city, ended up moving to Atlanta, and then got into more of the conventional property management that way. And then about 11 years ago, I partnered up with some guys and had the opportunity to start a management company from the ground up. So that's been an awesome experience. And this is what I'll be doing for the rest of the way, and definitely enjoy it every day.
So let's go back to your days as a student housing property manager and then transitioning into market rate multifamily housing. What was the biggest difference in managing the day-to-day operations with student housing versus market rate housing?
Yeah, I think people that may not know the industry or just the intricacies with student housing, it's hard to appreciate it. But what I equate it to is you're basically doing a lease up every year, right? So you have about maybe a 20 to 30% retention rate on student properties. And then you're leasing up the other 70% every year. But then on top of that, all of your move outs happen on the same day. And then you have 2 to 3 weeks to recondition those units and get them ready for that 70% to take occupancy in August. So it's basically, not only a lease up, but then you got to execute it in about a 2 to 3 week period. So it's definitely, like I said, it's property management on steroids. It's a great, learning experience for people just getting into the business. Conventional is, easier in the sense that you don't have that large turnover in the fall. There's other differences that, student housing is generally a bit quieter, outside of that turn period. Conventional, you can have, you're kind of busy pretty much all year round, but student housing definitely overall is a totally different animal.
how do you balance your P&L on an annual basis when you have those heavy turns, once a year, right? How do you bring in freelance staff, or how do you work that with student housing and your internal P&L?
Yeah, I mean, I don't do a ton of student housing these days, but I was coming up in the business. I was started off on site, and then I was a regional manager overseeing student housing assets. And basically, you have to ramp up your staff times 4 for about a 2-month period. And you're utilizing temp labor, you're utilizing contractors. A lot of times it's in college towns that don't have a lot of resources as far as vendors because they're just small towns in a lot of cases. You're bringing people from other properties and you're moving them on site into a vacant unit for 2 months. I mean, you got to be very creative. Also, it's all about contingency planning. You're going to have vendors that are not going to deliver. You're going to have parts that don't come in time. I mean, it's really, you're planning for it a year in advance, and then you just got to have plan B and C as well, because some things are not going to pan out.
Mm-hmm. What was one skill or one thing that you learned when you were cutting your teeth on that first job in student housing property management? What was one trait or skill that you were able to carry over to your subsequent jobs? Those first handfuls of years out of college.
I think definitely the marketing side of it. With it being a lease up every year, you are really hyper focused on getting that occupancy, because if you don't hit it, you're going to have to wait a year to recapture that market. And you can have a property sitting at 75% occupied for a year, if you don't hit your numbers. So it's a huge focus on marketing, huge focus on making sure that you've got the right curb appeal, the right leasing staff in place, because you cannot miss the mark. I mean, if you have a bad month, it can be devastating. So I've taken quite a bit of those marketing practices into conventional, and we do quite a bit of lease up projects as well. So those are similar to student housing in a way.
So I think you said 11 years ago, you teamed up with the Hathaway companies, a prominent multifamily real estate developer in the Southeast, also based in Atlanta. And you have been building Province real estate essentially from the ground up with I would assume one of their main hires to grow this platform. How has Province, how did it come about, and how has it grown over the last decade?
So after kind of coming up on side in the corporate positions, I just felt like there was a better way to be executing on multifamily property management, and I wanted to start a company from the ground up. I felt like that there was just not a good option out there for third-party management. And I was approached in 2009 by Hathaway. They, at the time, themselves owned some properties. They had investors that owned properties, and it was a portfolio of 10 deals. And, they were using, I think, 4 or 5 different management companies amongst those 10 deals at the time. So they kind of had put some feelers out to, start a management group. I was put in touch with them, and then it just kind of went from there. We started Province. I was the second hire, and just built it up. So now we're up to about 7,000 units. We've disposed of about 15,000 in addition to that over the past 11 years. It's obviously been, a pretty hot market during that time. It wasn't so hot when we started, but it changed within a few years. But, now we are about 30 properties, about 7,000 units all over the Southeast. And we can really go nationwide if the property is large enough.
Talk about your current portfolio, the 7,000 units that you currently have under management. What's your avatar in terms of the type of asset that you're managing, or is it the type of investor that you're working with? Who is your customer in terms of that product, your sweet spot, or that sweet spot investor that is calling you, interviewing for a potential gig?
Yeah, so we're doing A, B, and C class assets, really mainly focused on conventional. We have a client that does tax credit, so we do some tax credit as well. But mainly conventional A, B, C. Our clients are going to be small to medium-sized owners that really just want either a more localized presence where we manage, or they just want to be a bigger fish in the pond than using one of the large national property management firms. They want that extra attention. They want to matter, with us. So our clients range from having one property to our largest, we have 7 with. So, that's kind of our niche, is that small to medium-sized owner and investor that just wants to be more of a focus than using a large national provider.
And what is your value add when you're talking with these potential investors that maybe they're doing their due diligence on their first acquisition or their 7th acquisition in a particular market? What is your value add? What is separating you from the other property managers out there?
One thing that I was very specific about when I started Province was that we were not going to just really, I see a lot of management companies that the properties take a hit operationally because the regional managers are loaded up with too many assets. I experienced it when I was a regional manager working for another organization. At one point, I think I had 16 properties in 5 different states, and it was 3,200 units. So at that point, you're really just putting out fires. You're not getting into the day-to-day improvement of rents, of the resident experience, being proactive. You're just being reactive. So we have a much lighter load for our regionals, which I think is hugely important to really affecting change to the NOI on these properties. We're generally about 6 to 8 properties per regional, anywhere from about 1,200 to 1,700 units. So we're running at about a half to 2/3 of what some other larger management companies would do.
That's significant. I feel that having a property management firm is hands down one of the key pieces of a management team, an investment team, especially if you're investing out of state, as I do, down in the Southeast. And having the property management firm that's going to essentially, they could very well be your boots on the ground. They could be managing your renovations, your CapEx items. In your eyes, how important is it for you guys to be one of those team members in this process and not just a property management firm?
So when we're taking over a property, if the owner is willing to, delve into it with us, we really try to understand their pro forma going into it. Especially if I have a client that is buying an asset versus just us taking over management midstream, they will, in a lot of cases, share their pro forma with me. We will do a draft operating budget well before closing. Talk through, hey, what are the variances with your pro forma? What are you targeting for rent growth on a value add? So we really try to go into it as if we're a partner in the deal, because at the end of the day, we're going to want to be able to execute it. We don't want to take on a property where the rent growth assumptions are just not going to be achievable in a certain submarket. So we try to get as much information from the client's business plan as we can and work with them to fine tune it. And, we'll be honest and let them know if we feel something is achievable or not.
Let's talk about underwriting for a second. How, when you're getting pro formas sent across your desk for potential additions to your portfolio, what are the glaring differences in underwriting now versus, say, a year ago? And then the second question is, where are investors missing the mark when you're reviewing a pro forma for a particular asset?
Definitely, the biggest thing that when I'm talking to a client is I just make sure that they are looking closely, obviously, at taxes and insurance. The insurance market is pretty volatile right now. Those are the two numbers that generally a client will provide us. Everything else, we can give them a good faith estimate based on our operating metrics. As far as what we generally see the most variances on is we'll see variances on payroll. Benefit costs for the on-site employees are going up, insurance costs. So generally, we'll have to kind of, give them, a kind of a reset on the expectations as far as payroll per unit in some cases. Also on general and administrative costs, one item that we're seeing a big increase on is cost for business licenses and operating licenses. So we're seeing a lot of municipalities that are requiring annual unit inspections by a third-party licensed inspector that can be adding, $3,000 to $5,000 a year in G&A costs on properties. On the marketing side, CoStar has taken over the online marketing platform. So those costs have gone up because they have very little competition in the space. So those are the kind of things that we'll look for and make sure that the client's pro forma is in line with what we're seeing on comparable size assets in real time.
Okay. So for the income side of the pro forma, what are you seeing in terms of rent growth? I mean, I know it really comes down market to market. Heck, Atlanta is still growing. They're growing rent rolls more so than other markets. But how are you underwriting, or how are your clients underwriting rental income now versus a year ago?
The people that I've been speaking to over the past few months are being pretty conservative for 2021. So they're underwriting, in some cases, almost no rent growth or none at all for 2021, just to be on the conservative side. But then 2022, they're kind of getting back to that 2 to 3% organic rent growth plan. What's interesting that we've seen is we've actually had some properties that have continued to grow rent through the pandemic. They've just had less turnover. They do have some bad debt and delinquency that's picked up. However, our turnover's gone down. So because of lack of inventory, we've been able to push price, and we've been getting it. On the income side, a lot of things we look for is, can we add or enhance utility reimbursement? Usually there is some meat on the bone for that. We have a really good utility reimbursement program. Other income, there's usually some low-hanging fruit that we can add for that. As far as things like negotiating a new cable revenue share agreement, doing doorstep trash service and making a margin on that. So those are things that can be put in place without any capital cost for the property.
Let's talk about the utility, the RUBS program. Are you seeing most of your clients that are implementing this, if it isn't already implementing, and that's charging back utility expense to each individual tenant? How are you, what percentage of your clients have already implemented that versus they haven't yet?
Any property that we take over now that is not billing the residents back for, things like water, sewer charges, unless it's an affordable property where you can't do it, we're implementing it either via a RUBS program or actual sub-meters in the units. There's no expectation anymore that people are going to be able to get water or gas or electric included with rent. I mean, that really kind of ended maybe 10 years ago. But we still do take over properties where water is included with rent. And from day one, we separate it out, start a RUBS program. So within 12 months, you're getting a full reimbursement on the water sewer expense.
What sort of steps do you have to take when getting that message out to the current tenants? Hey, FYI, on this day, you're going to start getting billed for water expenses or trash and sewer expenses. How do you approach that on a tenant relations standpoint?
So I get owners that ask me that question, and they'll say, that sounds great, but am I going to lose all my residents at renewal if I start billing them for water sewer? So the way we approach it is new people moving in are not going to know any different, right? They're fine. You just are explaining to them that, hey, you're going to get a bill based on an allocated, formula for water sewer, and they're fine with it. The battle you have to fight is on renewals. And what we do in that situation is we start talking to them early when their renewal is coming up. And we have template letters that we send out. We have a flyer that explains how the RUBS billing program works. And basically our message to them is that, hey, listen, you've been getting free water and sewer for, however long you've been living here. But we do have to end that at this time. There's also ways you can do it in certain states where you can start off at an artificially lower billing amount and then ramp the resident up slowly on the allocation over time so that it's not as much pain for them. So they may start out with a low bill and they're like, oh, this is not too bad. And then over a 6-month period, you get them up to full billing so it doesn't hit their pocket as much. And then it's not as difficult of a transition.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I had Brian Burke on the show way back in June. He's CEO of Praxis Capital. I think they own maybe 1,000 or 2,000 units in Atlanta. And back there in June, he was talking about how new properties they were underwriting, new acquisitions, they were going to be deferring any sort of significant CapEx. They were going to be deferring that down the road. How are you seeing your clients with regards to new acquisitions and deploying the necessary CapEx into these units to get them up to fair market value?
We do have some that are deferring completely any optional CapEx. We do have other clients that are kind of using it as an opportunity to get things done. Right now, it is a little difficult. There's some supply chain issues out there that are making it pretty tough to do our normal program, where if we were going to upgrade a unit as part of a client's renovation program, we would only add, in an ideal scenario, maybe a week of vacancy, to turn a unit and upgrade it. It's getting tough to do that now. Appliances are a huge problem right now. Things like shelving. We've got properties that are waiting on shelving. So you got to be careful about that. And if you've got a situation like that, it may make sense to defer it until the supply chain gets more back to normal.
Explain appliances and the difficulty of managing those. Is it the supply versus demand? Demand is outstripping supply right now, and are they getting too expensive? Explain that.
Yeah, there's an international shortage on appliances right now. So that's caused the prices to go up substantially, but also the lead times to basically double. So, if we in the past could get a washer dryer set in 2 weeks, it's taking a month now. So
wow, that's pretty significant.
You really just have to plan. Yeah, you got to plan in advance. It was even worse. It was 3 times as long a few months ago. It's getting a little better now, but we're basically ordering extra whenever we can do it. and then keeping it in stock in a garage on site, or in putting it immediately into a vacant unit. So you just have to really plan ahead for situations like that.
Is that shortage of appliances, is that factoring into the CapEx budgets that these investors are putting together with you?
It's something we're bringing up with them as far as timing of it. We have a lot of clients that want to do a washer and dryer program where they're purchasing them, installing them in the unit, and then running it back at a monthly rate. So we're just making sure they know on the front end that, hey, it's going to take us longer to roll this out. And your margin is not going to be as good because, we used to be able to get a washer dryer set for $600 a month, and then rent it for $50 a month. Now you're looking at $900, and you're still kind of in that $50 range. So the margin is taking a big hit. So, we're talking through that with them as well.
Interesting. Art, we're going to conclude this episode with the hard-hitting questions. These are the final questions I like to ask all my listeners. I normally start off with, what is your why?
As far as why I do what I do in property management.
Exactly.
Yeah, when I came out of college, I really I had a marketing degree, which is useless. And 95% of marketing majors go into sales. So I basically said, listen, I need to just pick an industry and learn it and work my way up. And I did have an interest in real estate. So just got into property management and have just worked up through the ranks. And basically now the thing about our company that I like is really just hiring people and seeing them grow day to day and start off as leasing consultants like I did. And then, within a few years, they're a regional manager. That's what I enjoy doing, is us providing a platform for people to grow in their careers.
What is a recent book or podcast or other piece of media that you've read or listened to or watched that's added significant value to your life or your career?
I just read the book about Mark Kelly, he just spent a year in space. I found that extremely interesting, just about, mental toughness and preparing yourself to do something like that. So, that was great. I'm kind of a space geek for that. As far as, day to day, there's a ton of resources out there with all the apartment associations. There's a lot of free stuff out right now, especially in COVID. We were utilizing the National Apartment Association information, the Atlanta Apartment Association. I always encourage our employees to do webinars and utilize these resources because things are just changing so quickly right now. You have to do that or you're not going to be able to keep up.
How do you like to pay it forward?
We with us being in housing, a big charity for us is we work with a group that deals with homeless placement. So we raise money for them, and then also we will work with them to provide housing on our properties as well. So that was just kind of natural for me and for us. That, hey, we're in housing, so what can we do to pay it forward with what is our day-to-day operation?
That's great. Can you plug that again if you didn't?
Yeah, so we work in Metro Atlanta. We work with a charity called Open Doors that does placement for people that are experiencing homelessness or doing rapid rehousing where someone may be experiencing eviction and they need rapid housing, and then they are covering their rent for a 6-month period. So it's also a good business practice for us as well.
Yeah, that's a great cause. Art, I want to thank you for your time for this interview. How can our listeners reach out to you or learn a little bit more about you and Province Real Estate?
Yeah, so our corporate website is Province, RE as in realestate.com. And also, I'm on all the usual suspects, LinkedIn and Facebook, and we have corporate presences on there as well. So those are all the best ways.
Awesome. Art Lieb, thank you so much for your time. Very grateful. And thanks for adding your value today.
No problem, Nick. Great to talk to you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave a rating and a review, which will help us introduce the podcast to other listeners. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which will give you access to other episodes you may have missed. Lastly, if you'd like to learn more about investing alongside us, then head on over to valueaddedpodcast.com. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you next week.